Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namashristam Manumapi Satriputram Atra Sarupam Rupam Tasya Grajamuru Purim Matarim Gastavatim Radha Kundam Girivaram Maho Radhikamadhavasam Prapto Yascha Pratita Gripaya Sri Gurum Tamnatasmi Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Gripa Sindhubhyaivacha Titanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Nikhila Shruti Male Ratnamala Vyuti Nirajita Padapankajanta Aji Mukta Gulairupasyamanam Paritashtam Harinam Samshrayami Anaripitacharim Chidat Karunayavatirna Kalam Shamarpaitamunnatashvalarasam Savakti Shriyam Hari Purata Sundara Dyuti Kadamba Sandipida Sadaridaye Kandaresh Purato Vasachinandana Janulambita Bujjo Kanakavadatum Sankirtanai Kavitaro Kamalai Takshan Vishwambaro Dwijavaro Jugadharma Pal Unde Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataram Ladini Shakti Sarupaya Gauranga Suridaya Bhakta Shakti Pradhanaya Kadadhara Namastate He Krishna Karuna Sindhudina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastate Radhe Vrindavanadi Shri Karunamrita Vahini Kripaya Nijapadabja Dasyanmayam Pradiyatam Vaktya Vihinaya Paradalakshay Chittas Chakamaditarangamadye Kripamai Tvam Sharanam Prapanam Brinde Namaste Charanarvindam Brinde Namaste Charanarvindam Shri RASA-LILA ki jai. So welcome to all of you. Good morning from North Carolina. And we are continuing with our unofficial series of lectures, if you will, on different occasions, different celebrations connected to, in this case, Kartik, these last lectures. We began, just a brief recap, since today we are finishing Kartik, we began with one lecture called What Shines in the Darkness, as you may recall, learning from crisis, uncertainty, and paradox. This was not connected to any particular festivity of Kartik, but to how to deal with elements that are connected with many festivities, as we saw after that. And then we continue with Govardhan Puja and the most unexpected shelter during the most unexpected tragedy. And last week, we shared some words about Sri Gopastami and the concept of transitions and rites of passage in God's life, even, or to speak of our own. So somehow continue with that theme, or that way to addressing the Lila and trying to extract some values and teachings. We are reaching today the very end of Kartik. Today is the very last day of Kartik Vrat. And today we will be speaking about the crest jewel, if you will, of all of Bhagavan's Leelas, which is the RASA-LILA, Sri RASA-LILA, which is celebrated today as well, as we will see. Interestingly, the very first day of Kartik, there is a commemoration and celebration of RASA-LILA. And again, on the last day of Kartik, you will find the celebration of RASA-LILA, sometimes called Krishna Rasa Yatra, not to be mistaken with Ratha Yatra, the cart festival of Jagannath. So Rasa Yatra, the festival of Rasa, another way of saying Rasa-LILA. So there are different opinions, as usual, among sadhus. and some of them will mention that the Rasa-LILA, which is celebrated on the first day of Kartik, has to do with the one described in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Rasa Panchadhyaya. And the second one is described in Govinda Lilamrita of Krishna-das Kaviraj Goswami, and happens at the end of Kartik. And the last one, only Yuteshwaris and Nitya Siddha Gopis are included, eternally liberated participants, while in the first one, different devotees are also taking part of that. So there are different opinions. Today's talk is not to determine which is the bona fide one or whatever, but actually today I will mostly refer to the Rasa-LILA, which is described in the Bhagavatam and the Rasa Panchadhyaya, since it's the most well-known to all of us. And at the same time, no matter which Rasa-LILA you address, each Rasa-LILA is unique, because every Lila, remember, every Lila of Bhagavan is unique, is eternal, is always ever fresh, ever new. So we are never speaking about the same Lila twice, basically. You are not speaking about the same moment in our lives twice, but to speak of the Lila of Bhagavan. So somehow today is our last lecture of this, at least during Kartik. So somehow also the Rasa-LILA is considered like the converging point of all Lilas. So somehow all other Lilas must be connected with Rasa-LILA, must be including some of the ingredients that the Rasa-LILA is showing in the utmost degree. So let's connect before going to the Rasa-LILA per se. Let's connect some of our previous lectures very briefly to this Rasa-LILA and show how all these other Lilas, Gopastami, Govardhan Puja, and even our first lecture are pointing, converging in this unique drama, fully converging there, giving thus proper conclusion and climax to this unexpected again, but an unplanned series of lectures. So the first lecture we gave almost a month ago was What Shines in the Darkness. So as you may recall, although we didn't address any Lila there in that lecture, we indeed spoke about coexisting with the unknown, with the uncertain. We spoke about God as divine mystery, about the dark night of the soul, and liminal space and whatnot. So all of these are concepts which will become, as we will see, literally embodied during the Rasa-LILA. In Rasa-LILA, we'll have the dark night of the soul, or that midnight of the soul, because that's the moment where Krishna is calling the gopis. We'll find the deepest secret, the deepest mystery being revealed. We will find the gopis' disposition to embrace darkness, uncertainty, in their pursuit of the highest truth, and so on. All these ingredients we spoke in the first lecture. Then in connection with Govardhan Puja, as you may recall, this Lila is happening a little bit before Rasa-LILA, as we can see from the sequence of chapters in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Govardhan Lila is pointing, as we already mentioned, to the Vrajavasis' total surrender, total deep faith, conviction, willingness to adjust in shelter. The shelter may take any unexpected form, like a giant heel turning into an umbrella, and the Vrajavasis are totally willing to adjust to the form that the shelter is taking, all of which is needed. Again, all these ingredients of willingness, adaptation, surrender, faith, all of them are fully required to be in place as a foundation for something like Rasa-LILA to happen. And then Gopastami. We had Gopastami last week, and we spoke about rites of passage there. And we, at one point, connected the idea of rites of passage and transition with, as a synonymous with initiation, our notion of initiation. And we then connected initiation with Krishna's flute call, the ultimate initiation, if you will, in Lila, hearing your name included in the sound of the flute. And we mentioned how that flute call, as we will see today as well, is an ongoing process. for eternity. It's not that the flute sounds only once and Krishna gets tired of his flute playing, or Brajavasi gets bored of hearing that. It's ongoing, eternal. So as we'll see, this flute call that we connected here with the Gopastami lecture represents the very beginning and the inauguration, if you will, of the Rasa-LILA. The flute call, the clarion call, sometimes called. Clarion call is actually an English old expression. Interestingly, it has to do with a strong, at least the main official definitions of the expression clarion call had to do with a strong request for something to happen. So that's very much tied to Rasa-LILA. Or another definition is a very clear message or instruction about what action is needed. And there's a third definition that I found that says a strong and emotional appeal to people to do something. So again, all of them with their different nuances are quite fitting with what the Rasa-LILA implies. Why? Because again, Rasa-LILA is a clarion call. It's a strong request for something to happen. When Krishna is playing the flute call, clarion call, there is an intention, there is a call, very strong request for something to happen. Why? Because our God, if you want to put it like that, Rasaraj Sri Braja Krishna, at this moment, he's dying of separation from the gopis. So, due to a very urgent necessity of relishing a new height of love, that's what his life is about. Now we have a totally vulnerable God in the time of his greatest need. That's Rasa-LILA. Krishna is dying in separation, so he makes his vulnerability clear by playing the flute. So yes, his flute call, his clarion call is a strong request. He's about to die, for something to happen, for the gopis to answer to his call and basically save his life. The other meaning of clarion call also fits with Rasa-LILA, a very clear message or instruction about what action is needed. So the message is very clear message. Remember, it's something absolutely specific. Krishna's flute call is not abstract sound, any note, any sound, but a specific thing in which each of the gopis hear their names in that sound. Remember that this lila, we could say, is the zenith of specificity. This lila is the zenith of radical personalism. This expression that we have been inaugurating recently. No, it's so specific. Again, our tradition is personal to the core from day one, but the more Krishna Lila unfolds and reaches height, the more specific it will become. That's why we call Raga Bhakti, Raga Nuga Bhakti, the path of specificity. So the flute call is so specific, it's so clear, very clear. It's not just I hear the flute, but I hear my own name in that flute call. That's the experience of the gopis, the height of specificity. And the very clear message is again about what action is needed. So the needed action again is the gopis need to leave everything behind in order to save the life of the object of their love, of Krishna. That's the emergency call, if you will. And finally, remember, the third definition of clarion call was a strong and emotional appeal to do something. So this is, again, totally in line with the flute call of that inaugurates the Rasa-LILA. Krishna is crying through the flute. He's not just playing the flute, he's crying the flute, if there's place for that in expression. He's crying the flute, or he is crying through the flute, imploring on the verge of death. Again, dying in separation, begging to the Braja Gopikas. Please do something. Remember, it's a strong emotional appeal, crying, dying, for someone to do something, do something. And what's the do something for the gopis? Krishna is saying, come and save my life. I cannot live a moment more without you, basically without your love. I cannot live without love. I'm dying. That's Krishna. He cannot live without love. That's the idea. That's the dynamic of Lila. And many times we already mentioned that in the past. No? These are the real necessities. We worship a God who is really needy, which means speaks about the depth of his standing. It's not that the more needy you are, the more inferior you are. Not the contrary. It's not that the more vulnerable you are, the lower you are. No. Here we are speaking about necessities which come out of love, out of dedication, out of there are total different category of necessities. As we will speak today, and today we start to hint here the subtitle of today's lecture. So RASA-LILA being a sacred dance and not a survival dance. So in survival mode, we have necessities, but they come out of survival mode. But in loving mode, in love mode, another necessities come, the real necessities. So by identifying with the real necessities, we can develop an identity. By identification with the necessities of love, we can develop an identity as servants in that arena, and which will be our service, as many times we say, to save God's life on a daily basis. So much need is there, which means so much love is there. So this is RASA-LILA, the climax of the Bhagavad, the climax of God's own heart overflowing, the climax of the Brajavasa's dedication, the climax of all love, service, surrender, faith, mystery, harmony, the climax of all integration of complexity, as you will see, and the ultimate embrace of the darkest cloud of unknowing, if you want to put it like that, which is another name for Krishna, ultimately, Gana Shyam, he who is dark like a cloud. So the gopis are embracing, running after the darkest cloud of unknowing during the midnight of the soul. The flute is sounding not during the day at this point, but during the night. But on Purnim, interestingly, full moon. So interestingly, RASA-LILA is celebrated generally connected with Purnima, which means full moon, because here we can make a similar parallel to that of Gaur Purnim. Why? Because on RASA-LILA, you have two half moons, Radha and Krishna. They are born Astami, as you know, Radha Astami, Janmastami. And on RASA-LILA, the two half moons will fully unite, and there become full moon, Purnim. So RASA-LILA is celebrated on Purnim. So this Lila, RASA-LILA, of course, as you know already, this Lila can be addressed and has been addressed from unlimited perspectives, because of course it's unlimited in itself, unlimited degrees of depth, unlimited angles of vision. But as we have been trying to do throughout this particular month, with your permission or without it, I will address the RASA-LILA again with the help of our allegorical eye. We will touch, of course, upon some of the main points of the Lila, but just touching some of them, because a comprehensive study of RASA-LILA will take innumerable, considerable sessions, a lot. So trying to draw different lessons, we will try through the allegorical eye, as we have been doing, trying to draw some different lessons that may speak to us in our present stage as sadhakas. Hopefully all of that creating the necessary underlying background for us, not only to access the ultimate participation in that lila, but also to, as we mentioned, to start to participate in some way in this lila and every other lila here and now, to start to feel part of that and not feel a part, but a part of that, by relating to the lila through the teachings that the lila is embodying, through the message that the lila is throwing at us, if you will, all of which can be can be applied and will manifest throughout even the most ordinary moments of our life, as we mentioned. That's exact places, my dear Thomas Merton will say, exact place where our salvation begins, in the ordinary. So RASA-LILA presents itself in a so-called apparently ordinary setting, rural and so on, making this point. The highest treasure we'll find in the midst of the most apparently ordinary circumstance. So the very fact that the Braja-lila seems so ordinary, aprakrita, is trying to teach us this most valuable lesson. But before going to the Rasa-lila narrative in itself and the clarion call, the original flute call that we briefly touched upon, let's go to the preliminary call before the clarion call, if you will, because there are many, as we will see, many degrees of call, many layers of complexity that this lila will unpack and unfold and need to be put in place so the ultimate final celebration, the consummation of love, takes finally place. So as we know, the gopis have felt in love with Krishna in the unfolding of the earthly lila in what's called purva rag, or the falling in love, before officially acknowledging that. And all this time, Krishna has been reciprocating with the desire of the gopis, according to how the lila was unfolding. So on both ends, we have intense desire to please develop's desire. The gopis have intense desire to please Krishna's desire, and Krishna has intense desire to please the gopis' desire, which is tied to him, and his desire is tied to them. So there we have no selfishness. And there's nothing that ends in one's own being, but always in the beloved. And that's, as we know, the difference between Kam and Prem, which is one of the main teachings of the Rasa-lila, which is called Kam Vijay, victory over Cupid. Atmendriya pritibam chatari balikam krishnendriya priticha dhari premanam. Kam, or selfish love, if you want to call it like that, has to do with one's own self in the center, thinking one's in the center, while Prem has to do with Krishna in the center. So as we will see, this Rasa-lila and our whole tradition speaks about this, speaks about attaining a particular place from which we can freely love. That's an interesting point. Our tradition is not so much about freedom from desire, but freedom for desire. If we speak about liberation or salvation or redemption, it's just because that will allow us to offer ourselves in a much more comprehensive way for the pleasure of Bhagavan, for the loving desire that this Rasa-lila is all about. So it's not freedom from desire, it's not a world denial tradition, it's not a tyag, mukti oriented tradition, but it's freedom for desire. Once you are free from all false sense of desire, you can really desire in the proper direction. And that's the whole idea. Thus, in this way, hoping to attain Krishna in this purva rag, the gopis worship Katyayani Devi, as we know, and Krishna came eventually, I'm just summarizing a lot here, came and performed his famous Vastraharana Lila, where Krishna steals the clothes of the gopis, and he leaves the gopis naked before him, in the naked now, as we spoke these days as well. No? To be totally naked in front of God, nothing to hide. That's the secret of practice. What's the secret in our practice? Do not have secrets in your practice. Only by not having any secret, you will access all those things that still remain a secret for you in your practice. So that's the symbol through the allegorical eye that the gopis are represented by standing naked in front of Krishna. And eventually, Krishna promises to the gopis there, accepting them on some level, that the ultimate consummation of their mutual love will come soon during Purnim, which we are speaking now in connection to the Rasa-lila. So when the proper moment came, just before Rasa-lila began, as we know, Yogamaya reminded Krishna of this. So look at the full moon. This is the moment you promised this to the gopis. So Krishna looked at the full moon. Yogamaya inspired Krishna. The golden full moon reminded Krishna of Radha's face, and the sky was also like dyed with some reddish colors in the sunset in that part. So the sun was hiding. So the red color reminded Krishna of Radha's passionate love for him. Rag, the rag is depicted in red color. So in this way, Krishna reminded Radha, and he felt inspired to satisfy her desires and the desire of all the gopis. Remember, this is not about anyone's selfish satisfaction. That's Rasa-LILA. Krishna is inspired to satisfy the desire of Radha and the gopis. Gopis are inspired to satisfy Krishna's desire. That's who Krishna is. Krishna in Vrindavan is called Prem Pujari. You may know that there's a famous song about that. Prem Pujari means he's a priest of love there. So he's with his own hands, he's serving everyone, the cows, the gopas, the gopis, in all their needs. He has no other business apart from that. That's what our God does as a job. He has nothing to do apart from satisfying the desires of his devotees. So that's the beginning of Rasa-LILA. Interestingly, the very first verse of Rasa Panchadhyaya, chapter 29 of the Bhagavatam, encapsulates all this. Bhagavana Pitaratri Saradthot Fulamalika Bhiksharantam Manashchakri Jogamayam Upasritaha. Sukadev mentions that Bhagavan, interestingly, the first word, the Rasa-LILA is Bhagavan, to make it clear, this is not an ordinary guy of the village, he's Bhagavan. And he's supreme. One of the qualities of Bhagavan is supremely detached. So although he seems supremely attached here, bear in mind that he's supremely detached in another sense. So not to mistake this for something ordinary. So upon seeing these autumn nights scented with blossoming flowers, jasmines, Bhagavan turned his mind toward lowing affairs. His mind felt inclined towards engaging in romantic exploits. So Jogamayam Upasritaha. For that to happen, to fulfill his purpose, he took shelter in Jogamaya. So this is the situation. Krishna is looking at the moon, he's feeling Udippana, some stimulus, and Krishna's desire comes, which is again in connection to the gopis' desire, which is in connection to Krishna's desire, and so on. So in this way, Krishna feels inspired to invoke his clarion call, as we already said. So Krishna invokes his clarion call. He plays his flute at this point, and the gopis heard his desperate cry. And again, he's crying. Krishna is crying his flute. He's calling each of them specifically, desperately. So all of them, you can imagine, after hearing such an urgent call, just has nothing to do but run behind that sound, leaving everything half done, whatever they were doing, cooking, cleaning. They were dressing themselves. They will come just dressed, half dressed. And all the ornaments will be put in the wrong place. This is another form of alankara, although it doesn't seem like alankara, like ornamentation, but it's especially enhanced, beautified ornamentation, with the lipstick is put like an eyeliner, and the foot little bells are put on the waist, and the bracelets are put like earrings, and everything in the wrong place. So the gopis, how to say in English, dishevelment. The gopis' dishevelment actually is all that speaks about Krishna's irresistible attraction. It's praising that. It speaks how attractive is his call, or how needy is his situation. We could put it like that also. That the way they appear very clearly depicts the urgency of the moment. There was no time to think about where to put this, where to put So the gopis are following the call in divine self-forgetfulness. Try to remember this. They are not aware of anything but that sound, that call, that necessity, that particular invitation for further dedication. They were not aware that they had husbands, that they had home, they had duties at home. They were not aware that they existed. Again, self-forgetfulness means I forgot about myself. In divine love, which is not the same that you are depressed and you want to kill yourself. Please do not mistake the gopis bhav with tamaguna. So the gopis cannot remember that they have duties at home, because they cannot remember that they have a home, because they cannot remember that they exist. They are just aware of the object of their love. So there, and that object is in the utmost necessity. So it's not a decision for them when they hear the call. Should I go? Should I not go? There's no second option. There's no house. Although they are in the house, they forgot they had a house. The husbands are nearby. they cannot see their husbands. There's a total merging with the call. Try to get this point. As we as sadhakas try to get that lesson as well. When we are being called in some particular direction, how much we should identify with the call, with Krishna's will, how much we should absorb ourselves in that direction. So interestingly, RASA-LILA eventually will take place, as we will know, not only at night, but eventually at midnight, which is the darkest moment, if you want to put it like that, of the day. This reminds me of Saint John of the Cross, who wrote the famous book of The Dark Night of the Soul. And he, in his explanation, he speaks about different layers of dark night, of darkness in the dark night of the soul. And the deepest one, the darkest one, is the midnight of the soul. Not only the dark night, the dark midnight of the soul. So that's the place where the RASA-LILA is taking place. That's the moment. But interestingly, it's taking place at the darkest moment, but during Purnima, which is the brightest, of course, moon during the night, during the month. So the two combined, midnight and full moon, imply the notion of shining darkness, as we already explained. You have to enter darkness, but there is what shines there, as we spoke like a month ago almost. So the full moon is enlightened and is guiding the gopis to enter the dark lord, if you will, but at the same time they're entering the forest. So don't forget, and the forest is very thick, it's very dense, so it becomes more and more dark. Despite outside there is full moon, if you will, inside the forest it becomes more and more dark. But the gopis are entering there. So the gopis run, it's dark, the moon is shedding light, but then they enter the forest, so there's no longer see the moon, and so so in this way darkness and light accompany each other, if you will, assist the one who is on the journey, or this particular journey, this abhishar or love journey, the abhishar. So so again, they are embracing obscurity, if you will. The gopis are willing, all this is bringing us back to this principle: embrace obscurity, uncertainty, the mystery. Embrace all that while running behind the clarion call. I know it may sound scary, but at some point we need to enter there. We need to go faster and faster in that direction. Of course, RASA-LILA is the highest of the highest, and not everyone may be there. But at least we should not cheat ourselves and deny all this section because it's making us nervous or something like that. No, we should somehow appreciate that, at least in theory, to the point that we develop some inspiration to get closer and closer to that path. So this connection with all this, remember, we spoke about gopis are hearing the flute, are receiving diksha in the lila, if you will. No? The diksha process overflows from the life of a sadhaka and continues in its own unique way in the life of the siddha, or the perfected being in lila. So diksha can be tied with the flute call. And again, as we mentioned last class in Gopastami, diksha initiation, flute call, all this is to be conceived as a process, not as a one-shot experience, something that happened yesterday and it's gone. But it's a process that develops, unfolds, and culminates in hearing the flute call, the clarion call in Lila, hearing your name being called in full desperation. In one sense, it culminates there, but in another sense, it keeps overflowing because that flute call is in itself an ongoing process which has no end. Krishna plays the flute every single day, all day long. So the flute keeps sounding with more and more necessity from Krishna. That's how love works, basically. Love lives, expanding, growing, evolving. So every single day, Krishna has a new heightened necessity. And the dedication from the gopis and all the Brajavasis keeps increasing because Krishna's necessity becomes their necessity. So if Krishna's necessity has increased, then our necessity will increase, and so on. So here the gopis are receiving what we may call further diksha, which is an ongoing event into eternity. We had to get accustomed to thinking those in these terms about these things. Ongoing. So regarding the gopis' reaction of leaving everything behind, remember, they heard the flute and everything was put aside, basically, organically, and they just ran behind the clarion call. This, of course, also speaks a lot about the very nature of parakya bhava. And basically, this is what differentiates parakya bhava from swakya bhava. And swakya bhava, you have a legal marriage with Krishna, so there's nothing to hide, nothing to fear, not that much darkness to enter, not that much risk, and so on. But parakya bhava is especially characterized by that. Even if you have affinity for other rasas, which of course there is place for that, there is an application of the parakya principle in this sense for every single sadhaka, which is what? To be willing to break all ties to follow Krishna's call. That's not limited to Braja Gopis in Madhurya Bhav in Braj. That's expected from any surrendered soul who wants to love God, basically. And Krishna is saying that in the Gita. That's the conclusion of the Gita. Sarvadharmam parityaja mamekam sharanam braja. Amtvam sarva papabhyam mokshayasyami masuchaha. Krishna says, don't fear, because he knows we fear to surrender, to enter such darkness, to give such a quantum leap. And he begins, in the beginning of the Gita also, he says, Masucha, don't fear. Recently, I read that also in the Bible, they have the quote, don't fear, or don't worry, which is basically the same, 365 times, once every day, per day. Like making the point, this type of books, this type of mystic content, mystic call is scary for most. So constantly we have to tell people, don't be scared, don't fear, because the idea is everyone will be trembling, basically. So all of us are invited to that, especially if you want to point to Braj, what to speak if you have affinity towards parakya bhava. To break all ties to follow Krishna's flute call. That's how it works, basically. To break all obstacles, if you will. That's Vrindavan. Vrindavan, as one devotee said, I like that. Vrindavan is full of ideas where they are not measuring the consequences. That's Vrindavan. It's a place full of ideas where no consequences being measured. They just run after that. And that's the very definition of parakya. Rupa Goswami said parakya must be secret. Parakya will be full of obstacles. Parakya will be full of risks, quote unquote risk. Of course, at the end of the day, no risk, all gain. But all that makes this love very interesting and unique. And the gopis are totally ready for that. So, of course, again, going back to us sadhakas, because we hear about the gopis, we speak about them, but there is a point which naturally some of us may feel, but Maharaj, I'm not the gopi. I'm not there. I don't have that standard, that level. I cannot imitate that. I cannot force that. So how that applies to my sadhaka layer, if you will. So for us as sadhakas, this will imply this parakya principle, if you will, not to compromise your integrity, not to compromise your ideals for anything inferior. And if someone gets in the way of that, then you should transcend that obstacle, but knowing what to choose to follow. I mean, at least as much as we can perceive that, as much as we can see that, and we should know we are not seeing the full picture, so we should be praying for seeing more of that, but not to compromise our ideals, our integrity in whatever circumstance. We want to increase that, not to decrease, to upgrade, not to downgrade that. So hopefully we may have many needs, and I know we all have different degrees, but hopefully above all our necessities, our number one necessity is, I need to keep my integrity intact in my pursuit of truth. Because if this gets compromised, the whole project becomes polluted The whole process becomes corrupt, basically. Because if I don't keep my integrity intact in my pursuit of truth, I will get something else apart from truth as a result, but I won't get truth. Because in the very process, there was some compromising. So that's how we could apply one of the ways, the way the globe is run after the flute. Because again, sometimes in life, all of us have to choose between everything or everyone else, or remain loyal to the truth. Sometimes we will, maybe not all of us, or maybe not always, but sometimes we may be put in those situations. You can have, even on one side, full majority, or on another side, truth. Like Christ says something similar. If you want to be my disciple, you have to be ready to abandon everything. That doesn't mean necessarily you have to abandon everything. But in case that becomes an obstacle to your pursuit of truth, in case that compromises your integrity, hopefully you should know what to do at that moment, what to choose. Of course, again, we are sadhakas, so I'm not expecting any of you to leave any of the things that the gopis left, for example, in a literal way. I'm not saying leave your husband, leave your house, leave your kid there crying and don't feed him anymore and just try to hear the flute in the forest. I'm not saying that. But my point is, I also hope we may not compromise our integrity either. We have to find some point in between. So the challenge is to integrate all these situations that make our part of our life as much as that's possible. And if something in my life is not possible to integrate and is compromising my integrity, then comes the moment of some important choices in our lives. There are moments that we have to really know what to choose. And of course, at least personally, I'm totally confident that if I fully embrace truth, even at the risk of everything else, not at the risk of truth, not at the risk of integrity, but at the risk of everything else, even if to that point, to that degree, Krishna will never leave me, devoid of real shelter, devoid of real sangha, devoid of real mercy, and therefore there won't be nothing to lose, all gain, even if externally one may be losing everything. You will be put in a situation where you cannot be deprived of the very thing that you can keep with yourself. I remember Viktor Frankl saying in Man's Search for Meaning, he will say, like, a man can be deprived of everything except for one thing, which is one chooses how to respond to the environment, to whatever happens in your life. Nobody can take that from you. You decide, you choose. That big responsibility. So if you choose properly, you will realize I've not lost anything. But again, in the other direction, of course, we face those dangers as weak, conditioned souls to compromise. Even officially being practitioners of Gaudiya Vaishnavism or practitioners of whatever tradition, we can render lip service to the ideal, but in the moment of practical truth, something opposite can come. As we were reading the other day by Martin Luther King Jr., who shared something. He mentioned he ended up a list of points of his nonviolent movement, saying, but we should not be naive, and we should know that most people's loyalties are with security, public image, and the comforts of the status quo. And he said that more than, 50 years ago, more. So what to speak now? Public image, security, social media, comfort, status quo, tribe validation. So, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised by that. That's the point. And Krishna himself says that. I mean, he says in the Gita over and over again, Manusyanam Sahasrashu, from many people, only a few, and from those few, only a few, and from those few, only a few. So we shouldn't be surprised. Most people join even a religious group, even a mystical tradition, at least the tradition is mystical in theory, but those who join it, most will join by looking for security, for a place to stay, for social dynamics, for position, for name, for status quo, public image, or some join by a sincere inquiry, but then get trapped by those things, with those traits, bhakti-yuta anartha, what we may call. and they will choose to remain there in the name of chastity or loyalty or faith. I mean, if you want, you can justify everything, even with mystical language. So, but in those cases, instead of faith, there's actually absolute fear of dealing with the unknown, of going deeper, of going out, leaving the comfort zone. There's total terror of losing the benefits, quote unquote, of being part of an institution or group or whatever. No? So maybe many will externally may end up showing an apparent faith or strong faith regarding belonging to a tribe, an absolute certainty about the tribe, about whatever ideals or whatever. But the underlying foundation in many of those cases is fear. It's the opposite. It's not faith. And there's a total unwillingness to leave the comfort zone and inhabit the land of uncertainty, which again, the gopis are showing the way. Don't lose sight. We are speaking about the gopis indirectly and directly. What the gopis are doing and what's the opposite of that. Sometimes we need two of them to have everything in place. So this is the opposite of the gopis' mood. Tribal thinking, my group, my people, only that, I only care for that. Even if that's corrupt, I care for that, because you don't want to be bereft of a group yourself. That's the actual situation. Insecurity, unwillingness to deal with darkness, to be by yourself and having to solve certain things. So here the gopis are showing the exact opposite. That's in the Bhagavatam. Again, I'm not creating a new philosophy. You have to read the Bhagavatam. The gopis are showing this bravery and this courage of just running and risking everything for the sake of truth. And the opposite is cowardice, is fear. We're generally, instead of being even willing to lose something for the sake of truth, we always have to scapegoat someone to keep the group together. That's the tribal level standard of unity, if you will. When you're on a tribal level, that's what you want to do. You want to receive constant confirmation. You are right. You are correct. You want to hold your knowing to a safe post. I know the things correctly. You don't want to expose your so-called knowledge or yourself to any form of unknowing. Those things are dangerous. But the point is that the majority of the mystery of God lies in what you don't know, not in what you know. So again, which type of practice you want to have, which type of movement do you want to belong to, which type of ideal do you want to nourish. So the gopis are teaching by example, by running into that mystery, Bhagavan, Krishna, without even thinking about it twice. It's not that they are even calculating. So it is here that we somehow are reaching the official title of today's talk, which is Life is a Sacred Circular Dance, not a mere survival dance. And just in case, I may extend myself today a little bit more than the previous lectures, just for you to know. So Rasa-LILA, the height of life, sacred circular dance, not survival dance only. So Rasa-LILA is that, a sacred movement, and any other movement that avoid this sacred call, this commitment that we have been speaking about, this integrity that we need to honor, any other movement could be described as a survival dance. We are just moving out of instinct, out of fear, trying to protect what we think belongs to us, trying to protect what we think is the goal of us, and running in life not toward the actual flute, the actual clarion call, but escaping from the clarion call. We may be running, we may be seen running as many others, but we may be running in the opposite direction of the call of the flute. And we may create unending excuses not to change, not to mature, not to grow, not to transition to the next level. I mean, if you want, we can create a whole bunch of excuses forever, and all of them supported by Shastra. So that's why Krishna says, sincerity is invincible, in the words of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. But of course, that the opposite of that is, if you are not sincere, you will be always defeated. Even if externally it seems you are defeating everyone. You have Shastra to justify each of your movements. That's not how it works. You have to be sincere. So that's the idea here. You have to learn to nourish your faith through challenge. You have not to escape challenge to have a strong faith. You have not to remain in comfort zone to be protected. You need to nourish your faith through challenge, through complexity, even through doubt. Doubt has a purpose of nourishing faith. Srila Siddhar Maharaj many times mentions that, how deep doubts and complete faith are always belonging to one another. The two belong together. Deep doubt, not deep doubts that you are questioning the validity of the whole practice, but deep doubts that you may have in your life. Doubts is not something bad. And complete faith has to do with that. Faith and doubt go hand by hand. If you don't embrace these, your so-called faith becomes your worst enemy, basically. Because in the name of that so-called faith, you will end up justifying literally everything in the name of that faith. And that's why the greatest atrocities in humanity were all performed in the name of faith. Because you have set the stage to justify anything. So in that sense, we are all potential monsters, if you will, in the name of faith. So we should be careful with that. It's a very delicate tool. So remember, faith and doubt go hand by hand. The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith, as we already said, is certainty. Doubt, uncertainty, unknowing, are all crucial aspects of our faith journey. Try to make place for them. Honor them when they come. Only a person that is blessed by Shraddha Devi can follow the traces of doubt. If we want to honor faith, to worship the deity of faith, you have to include doubt, you have to include the unknown, and you have to go out of your comfort zone and deal with challenge to really offer puja to the deity of divine conviction. If you can, through your faith, follow the trace of doubt, that will lead to a deeper understanding of the absolute, to the deeper form of faith, like the gopis are showing in this lila. As we will see, they are integrating so much. Anyhow, let's continue with the lila narrative. Sorry if I get sidetracked for a moment, but there are so many things to extract from these chapters. So we'll continue with our lila narrative. Interestingly, then the gopis hear the flute, they leave everything behind, just run after the sound of the clarion call, enter the dense forest, and they finally arrive what Krishna is. And as you know, and I will summarize some of these sections at this point, as you may imagine, but Krishna sees the gopis, and all of the gopis were coming from their specific destinies, and all of them saw this themselves. Oh, it was not only about me. And they see Krishna, and Krishna seems surprised to see the gopis. And he asks them, why you are here? Imagine, Krishna is calling them desperate, mentioning their name, and now he makes like, no, I didn't call you. So I think you should go back home. You are a lady, married lady. That's the highest dharma for a lady, to serve home, family. No? So again, Krishna starts to behave in a crooked way. Remember, love moves like a snake. Hari bhagati premnasa bhavakriti lavit. In zigzag. Zigzag means totally unexpectedly. You don't know which will be the next step. So Krishna is acting in that way. He calls the gopis, and now he seems to reject them or send them back home. And for sure, the gopis are in liminal space here. In a space where what's going on here, threshold, transitioning, inhabiting uncertainty in so many ways. Now he called us, he called our names, we heard that, and now he's sending us back home. But still, at the same time, they have the most important certainty in place. Although everything else seems uncertain, they are certain about their love for Krishna and vice versa. So that's what allows them to argue with Krishna. They do not leave, they argue, and that's the other section of the Bhagavatam called Pranaya Gita. And basically the gopis defeat Krishna in argument. And then the Rasa-Lila begins. After Krishna is defeated in an argument, Rasa-Lila, the first edition of the Rasa-Lila begins. We will make that point, because as we will see, as we can see, different layers of complexity are more and more integrated. The call of the flute, the preliminary call, the call of the flute, the gopis leaving everything, entering the thick forest, Krishna sending them back, the gopis defeating him, first version of the Rasa-Lila beginning. So many layers of complexity being integrated as the narrative progresses. And we should do the same homework now as well, ourselves and our situation. So for a minute, going back, when Krishna is sending the gopis back, again, we are further here presented with further layers of testing. Even the point is, you can even get to the rasa arena. You are there, Krishna calls you in the flute, you get there, you're in front of him. And Krishna said, let's see how much you actually want to participate in this. Let's test your level of participation. So Krishna is sending them back home. Better you go back. I'm sending you, so you have my approval. You are not going back home against my will. I'm sending you, so you obey me, please me, and go back. So the gopis have a good reason to return, because Krishna told them to return. But the gopis didn't obey him. They disobeyed Krishna. Why? Because Krishna's instructions were going against the highest ideal of dedications that the gopis had in mind. And also were contradicting what they heard in Krishna's call in the beginning of the Rasa-Lila. He called them from a depth, from a layer, from a necessity. So they went there to serve that. So they were not willing to abandon that project. Because if they will have returned to their homes, that will have compromised the gopis' commitment in service. You follow the point, and hopefully you can draw some parallels in your sadhaka stage. So similarly, if Krishna, even Krishna, or Guru or Sadhu, there are examples in Shastra about this, sometimes they may say or do something which goes against the standard of dedication and integrity that they themselves established in the past, that is expected from a representative of Bhagavan, or from God himself in this case. In those cases, the disciple is invited to take a distance and pray, thinking, okay, Krishna is testing me, testing my sincerity through this particular situation. But the student is not expected to follow those instructions or examples which go against what is supposed to be revealed by Guru, Sadhu, Krishna. One is not expected to engage in blind following, but in cautious, distant prayer for further revelation, but to take care of the integrity of one's commitment. So one brief clarification that comes in mind, once Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta, when speaking about Diksha, he said, when you accept Sri Guru, you go with a no return ticket in hand. And that surrender is, of course, and I think it's important to clarify just in case, because if not, we may say, okay, you already surrendered to a person, so from now on, you cannot argue and you have to do everything you are being told. Yes, but that provided that the person behaves as how should behave. We follow. Because if not, the dynamics change, the interaction changes. Surrender to Guru, surrender to Sadhu. Surrender is, of course, in consideration that the Guru behaves as such. In other words, a disciple do not surrender to a person, in one sense, to an individual, to a human being. As disciples surrender to a principle, to the flow of truth, revealing itself through a particular individual. And that's the principle of divine revelation, coming to one's life through, again, an agent, if you will. So the surrender is, so to say, not to someone, but to something that flows through someone. Surrender to that principle, surrender to the ideal, to that commitment, like the gopis are showing there. And of course, the ideal is that such surrender and such example from Sadhu continues flowing and increases forever, but we know sometimes that's not the case always. So in some cases, that principle of God's representation is contradicted, then the disciple is not expected to surrender in that case. If the guru is doing something that goes against what the guru taught for decades, the disciple will be loyal to the essence of the example, the teaching. Because if I surrender to something that goes against what is expected from a sadhu, that surrender goes against surrender. That surrender goes against the actual principle of substantial surrender and just becomes niyamagraha, doing something without knowing why I'm doing that, without having a proper explanation to myself. So in this case, when Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta said there is no return ticket in surrender to Sri Guru, again, one is not going backwards in one's commitment with the truth, no matter what form that takes and what's the price to pay. That's my point. If for example, a sadhu doesn't behave as such and the disciple takes a distance, he's not leaving truth, but taking a distance to take care of that truth and to understand it properly. And what to speak if something that is wrong in a confirmed way is happening by the person taking a distance, there is no compromising of one's integrity. On the contrary, one is embracing truth in a new way. So that's what the gopis are showing here. No return back home. The gopis didn't return back home. But at the same time, they disobeyed Krishna for serving him in a more substantial way. So they didn't return back home, but actually the gopis' home is not home. It's not the place where they didn't go. Home for them is full increased dedication to Bhagavan. That's our home. And regarding how Krishna will continue calling us, because again, it may be calling us in one way or another, sometimes in one way, sometimes in another, as we know, it's important that we should not be attached to the form of the call, but to the substance of the call. Did he play note A, B, C? Which raga he played? No, if he's calling, he's calling. Like we see in RASA-LILA, Krishna is doing that. He's playing the flute. Then he's sending the gopis back. Then we will see he will start to play the flute again eventually and will dance with them, as he will do in the first part of RASA-LILA. Then he will disappear from the RASA-LILA. The gopis will search for Krishna, call for Krishna. Krishna will reappear and again will play the flute, and RASA-LILA will attain its consummation point. But my point is, again, all this is moving in a crooked way. The flute will not sound always in the same way. The call will not be always in the same packaging, with the same shape, nor from the same direction. So we should be willing, my point is, and the gopis are showing that example, we should be willing to leave everything behind and just run to whatever the flute is sounding today for us, whatever form it takes. And when I say for us, I mean Krishna's flute call won't be the same for everyone. Krishna's flute call will be there for you, west, northwest, southeast for one. So the point is, I don't know, to give a practical example, many things happened in ISKCON when Srila Prabhupada passed away, as you may know. Some problems were there. And some devotees felt, okay, Krishna's flute call now is in the direction of outside of ISKCON and at the feet of someone like, I don't know, Srila Bhakti-Rakshaksidhar Goswami Maharaj, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, whoever. They felt this flute call for them in that direction. And some devotees felt that the flute call for them was remaining in ISKCON and trying to improve the situation there. And my point is, both of them were correct if they were sincere in hearing the flute call and not compromising their integrity. It's not that everyone should have gone to this, everyone should have stayed here, or like when Prabhupada was passing away and he said, I would like to circumambulate Govardhan in a bullock cart. He was really fragile at that time. And many devotees say, yes, we have to take him. And others say, no, he will die if we do that. And they were kind of struggling and fighting among one another. But both of them were hearing a different flute call, and all of them were sincerely wanted to please Srila Prabhupada. So that's the point. Sometimes Krishna will play the flute in different places and make a mess out of that. Everyone will be running in different directions. But we should be mature enough to understand I mean, to follow our call, but not to expect everyone else to follow my own call, not to demand that from others, not to criticize others following other call, and so on. So there's place for different people to be right following different flute calls. There's no single one absolute flute call for everyone. That's the point. Krishna is not that boring. Krishna, of course, Krishna played the same flute note to the gopis, but the gopis each heard differently. The note was heard differently. Their names were heard inside like a guided missile. No? Again, radical personalism. So even if he plays the same note, everyone will catch it differently. Indeed, other Brajavasis did not, in RASA-LILA at least, the rest of the Brajavasis who were not in Madhurya Bhav did not hear the flute call at all. So interestingly, what is a flute call for some is not even heard by others, and vice versa. So we should bear that in mind, and we should honor that. We should surrender to the flute call wherever it sounds, and not to the place from where it sounds, not to the institution from where it sounds, not to the social dynamic from where it sounds, or from where it's used to sound. I mean, if it's sounding there, it's okay, great. But if it's not sounding there anymore, that's another thing. We should choose properly. That said, of course, sometimes we may think we are following Krishna's flute call while we may be actually remaining in our comfort zone and compromising our identity. Again, that can happen as well. So that could be the litmus test, not to end up cheating ourselves in the name of the flute call. Where's your integrity? Is compromised or not? So we should not cheat ourselves in this way. We should not either, we should not cheat ourselves. Yeah, I'm following the flute call, whatever I'm doing, nor the other extreme being, I don't know, rebels without a cause. But if there is a cause, which is a noble cause, a noble call to a noble ideal, then we must be willing to risk everything in the pursuit of that. That's how it works. That's what the gopis are showing. They have enough noble cause to leave everything behind. But again, we should understand that while we can either join a cause or reject a cause for the right reasons, we can also join a cause or reject a cause for the wrong reasons. All can happen. It's not black and white as we may like to think. Krishna, again, does not play in one way, in one note, and so on. So I may be hearing the flute call in one direction, and you may not hear that one. But if both are genuinely called in one direction or another, whatever it may be, then that's not only okay, that should not only be allowed, but that should be properly honored and celebrated, this unity and diversity. What to speak of condemned or attacked, that should never be condemned or attacked. That should be worshipped. And again, RASA-LILA is here to establish all the things among many others. But the more, as long as we have not established all the things in our own life, we cannot progress to deeper layers of implications in this Lila. So we should learn to honor and celebrate how Krishna plays his flute and how everyone responds to that every time that sincere and integrity is not compromised, but upgraded. So going back to the Lila narrative, again, remember Krishna, the gopis defeat Krishna in argument. The first version or edition of RASA-LILA begins, but then what? Krishna suddenly disappears. And as we know, he disappears for many reasons, but we could say that one of them is, and that's what I want to focus today, as you may imagine, Krishna still felt not enough complexity had been integrated till this point. So I'm not deriving as much rasa as I know I could if the whole thing will be more mature, more integrated. So it was RASA-LILA, but not RASA-LILA with long A in Sanskrit, which implies a further abundance of rasa is there. So in other words, the fullness of rasa, which is fine in RASA-LILA, but not only in the beginning, as we can see of the RASA-LILA, but just only in its consummation. The fullness of rasa can only come after perfectly integrate all that needs to be embraced in the darkness. We can put it like that, following with our narrative. So in order to achieve that purpose, Krishna creates a further layer of darkness to be embraced, to be inhabited, to be integrated. A further layer of uncertainty, further layer of perplexity. How? By disappearing out of the blue. You have that in English, out of the blue. I think that's originally came from this moment in Rasa-Lila. Krishna is the blue one, Shyam Sundar. So the blue disappears out of the blue. He disappeared from the Rasa arena without any explanation whatsoever. So the first edition of the Rasa-Lila that ended abruptly here, he disappears, so this first edition can be properly revised. If we speak in terms like a book, you have this revised edition, second edition, you need some editing, some polishing. So Krishna disappears, so the first edition of the Rasa-Lila can be properly revised, can be properly nourished with further integration of complexity until we will get the final edition and the fullest culmination of this divine drama. The same that happened with the Bhagavatam, remember. Vyasadeva published the Bhagavad Purana, but he felt, I'm not satisfied yet. So he entered darkness, he entered Samadhi, and then he re-edited the Bhagavatam, which became a Srimad Bhagavatam, final version. So Krishna disappeared from the Rasa-Lila. In other words, the dance began, because they began dancing and celebrating existence. The dance began, but it requires some further upgrading. So in this way, tragedy is coming, or paradox, if you want to put it like that, is coming to nourish the situation. Krishna disappears. That's somehow tragic, or at least paradoxical. Why he disappeared? Everything was so incredible. In this connection, separation, the idea of separation that we Gaudiyas use so much, union, separation, could be seen as a parallel with the concept of dark night. It's not that actually he disappeared, but he's out of sight. So what's the result of Krishna's being out of sight? That the longing of the gopis becomes refined. That their search of the gopis become even more accurate, more comprehensive, looking for Krishna in separation, in the madness of separation. And all this leading to a perfect and absolute consummation. And again, that's how life works. Gradually refining our product to make it more and more offerable, worthy of being offered, getting closer and closer to our goal. That's how we advance spiritually. So Krishna disappears, and the gopis starts to search Krishna. And the search of the gopis becomes enriched, again, with further complexity to integrate. And thus the accuracy of their inquiry grows in depth, grows in vision. So I won't concentrate today in the details of the gopis' search and who they inquire from, and which was the back and forth, and how they inquire in divine madness from many inhabitants of the forest. But mostly I would like to mention some words before reaching the end about the quality of their inquiry, because we need to learn from that. How to inquiry with quality, which was the exhaustive spirit through which they conducted themselves in their pursuit of truth. Remember, all this in the context of pursuit of truth, running behind the flute, running behind Krishna who disappeared. Now for this, I would like for a minute to go to the Chatur Shloki of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which are 4 verses which summarize all the content of the Bhagavatam, which is mentioned that Krishna spoke them to Brahma in the beginning of creation, and from those 4 verses, everything else unfolded. So why I want to go for a minute to the Chatur Shloki, because again, Chatur Shloki is encapsulating the Bhagavatam, and therefore, since the Bhagavatam reaches its zenith in the Rasa-Lila, somehow Rasa-Lila and Chatur Shloki must be connected, because Chatur Shloki is a summary of the Bhagavatam, capsule. And they do indeed, interestingly. And interestingly, I won't go through every one of the verses, but I want to point just basically to the comprehensiveness, if such word exists, of the gopis' search of truth, how they were looking for Krishna's separation. That's the goal of the Bhagavatam. Satyam param dimahi. We are supposed to meditate on the absolute truth. And in the last verse of the Chaturshloki, it's very clearly the spirit of the gopis' search. The last verse of the 4 is the Abhideya Shloka, the verse which speaks how to engage in practice, how to attain the prayojan, how to attain the goal. So this verse comes in this verse 36 of 9th chapter of the 2nd canto of the Bhagavatam. Etavadeva jignasyam tattva jignasunatmana anvaya vyatirekabhyam yat yat sarvatra sarvada. It's a very beautiful verse. And here to say how one should, the spirit through which, the verse is not speaking about the gopis directly, but it converges in their example. The verse speaks about how one should conduct oneself in practice as to attain the goal of the practice. And Krishna says, Itavat iva jignasyam tattva. Tattva means the truth, or the absolute truth. Jignasyam means to be inquired. Tattva is to be inquired. One is to inquire from truth. Jignasunatmana. Jignasuna means the student. He who is inquiring should inquire about the truth of the self, atmana. How? Ambaya vyatirekavya. Directly and indirectly. In both ways, he should desperately, obsessionately look for truth. And yat yat sarvatra sarvada. Sarvatra, in all space, in all time. Sarvada, in all circumstances. That's the spirit of inquiry. That's the spirit of how to look for truth. In every time, place, and circumstance, directly, indirectly, obsessioned with my search. In a healthy way, of course. So this is a gopis spirit of inquiry. As you can see how they are looking for Krishna when he disappears. Totally obsessionate, totally mad. Entering the thick forest without fear at all, abhaya spirit. As it is said, fearlessness in the pursuit of truth is non-different from God. Recently, I was sharing some of my thoughts on that connection with a friend. This idea came, which points a lot to the beginning of the Bhagavatam. Fearlessness, to be abhaya in the pursuit of truth, to look for the truth without fear, actually is non-different from God. In other words, it will give us a result, God, who is the ultimate truth. Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta stressed this point in his famous final instructions. Maybe you recall them. He was bedridden before leaving, and he declared that he was obliged to speak Akaitava Satya Katha, following the 2nd verse of the Bhagavatam, Dharma Prayita Kaitavo Traparamonin Matsaranam Sadam, says the Bhagavatam has nothing to do with cheating. So hopefully if you embrace the Bhagavatam, if you're a devotee of the Bhagavatam, you are exactly in the opposite direction, Akaitava. So Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta say, I am obliged to speak Akaitava, which means free from cheating, Satya Katha. Satya means truthful or true. Katha means conversation, topics. So I am compelled to speak topics about the truth, which are devoid of all forms of cheating. He was compelled, in other words, and of course, not only him, hopefully, but also us, he was compelled to give a description of reality which truly corresponds to reality as it factually is, not to imagine reality, constructed reality, conjecture, assumed reality, speculated reality, but as it is. That's what Prabhupada published. Prabhupada Gita as it is, without being tinged with any selfish motive that will distort it, including moksha. The desire for moksha is considered by Gaudiyas as kaitav, as we know, kaitav dharma. And then, as we know, he concluded his instructions famously, his discourse. He encouraged his disciples, please also engage in this akaitava satya katha, in this non-cheating, truthful conversations of Sri Rupa and Raghunath in ekanta anugatyam, with one pointed following in spirit. And he concluded saying, with greatest enthusiasm and in a fearless voice. So we shouldn't be fearful. We should be fearless. Of course, in order to speak fearlessly, first we have to be fearless ourselves. That's an important point here. First, we have to not be afraid of those things we still may be afraid, as we have been speaking today. So the gopis are, again, pointing to all this. The opposite of all this, of course, is to remain in our comfort zone and to be terrified by those influences which exist outside of our bubble and invoke propaganda to protect others and still even more fear, but to present that such a thing is done for the sake of faith. We know of this through history. You study any basically dictatorship, and that's basically the narrative. But the point is, if we try to justify everything for the sake of faith, remember that every time that you say for the sake of, there's also one at the cost of. So we should have that very clear. What's the actual price that I'm paying for whatever decisions I'm making? I'm doing it for the sake of that, but this is coming at the cost of this. So that's to be aware of that and act accordingly. That's what we call responsibility. And that's the difference between cheap faith and costly faith. These days we were studying a little bit something from The Cost of Discipleship, an interesting book by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Christian theologian who was killed in the Nazi time. So he will speak about faith, cheap faith, when you are not willing to actually pay much, and costly faith, when you are willing to pay with your life, with your giving yourself to God, investing your integrity. In Sanskrit, we have similar terms: sakapata kripa, niskapata kripa, mercy with cheating, mercy devoid of cheating. So these two run parallel, for the sake of and at the cost of. They run parallel. The higher is our for the sake of, the higher and deeper will be our at the cost of. So if the cost of is your integrity, if you have to leave your integrity, compromise it, if that's the cost, what will you get in exchange of that? You will lose your soul and gain the world, as the Bible says, or you can lose the world and win your soul. And again, all this is perfectly shown in RASA-LILA, where the gopis choose to inhabit this in liminal space, willing to embrace the call for costly faith, not for cheap faith. They are willing to pay in the currency, the coins are with their own lives, with their own hearts, lovingly, voluntarily, not forced, not by pressure, not by fear, not by calculation, not by comfort. They are totally free to enter the dark, deep mystery that Krishna is. So a few words regarding Krishna's mystery, and with this we are concluding today's session. So please bear with me. So Krishna's mystery, remember we spoke about the Chatushloki of the Bhagavatam a few minutes ago. So in relation to mystery, I'm going back for a minute to the Chatushloki. Perhaps even more interestingly than the last verse speaking about the spirit of the inquiry that has to be in every place and moment, at the very beginning of the Chatushloki, before officially starting verse 31, the Chatushloki speaks about its content, what the Chatushloki will be about. And it uses two words, very interesting. One is rahasya, and the other is paramaguhya. Rahasya means secret. Paramaguhya means rahasya means mystery, sorry. And paramaguhya means supreme secret. This is similar to what the Gita is saying. The Gita in 9.2 is saying, Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam. Bhakti is the king of all that is secret. And then there are different levels of Guhya, Guhyatamam at the end, the topmost of all secrets. Dharmasya Tattvam Nihitam Guhayam. The secret of Dharma is hidden in the hearts of those sincere souls. So my point with all this is there's a lot of secret, lots of mystery. These very words are not even only Christian, because they speak a lot about that. And that's an interesting thing in itself. Because, for example, we, in our Gaudiya tradition, we know so much about God in theory. We know so much about his life, his name, his form, his pastime, his attributes. so much detailed description, but that doesn't mean that we have any realization of that. That's not synonymous with my relationship with Krishna. To know technical details about him as a theological person is not parallel to relate with him as a real person and where I am in that relationship. So it can be dangerous to know too much about God in theory, because we can think, I already know Krishna. Instead, for example, many Christians, and I appreciate that point, will mostly define God as unknowable and as divine mystery. The Vedas also include that. And I will say that we also should do that somehow, because as we say, we have seen Rahasya, Guhya, secret, mystery, Bhagavad and Gita, all of them are speaking those terms. We should not forget that all that I may know about Krishna is nothing in comparison to all that I don't know. Not to get discouraged, just to remain humble and realistic. At present, I finished, I think yesterday, I finished one book, interesting book from an anonymous mystic from Christianity called The Cloud of Unknowing, which I cannot avoid thinking about that. That's another way of referring to Krishna. Gana Shyam, he's a dark cloud. And he emphasized this point, that between us and God, there's a cloud of unknowing. It's not that we just can penetrate that and know everything in detail. So we should be willing to coexist with unknowing. We should find some comfort there. And the gopis are showing that here. That's my point. The gopis don't want to understand Krishna intellectually in their heads. They want to love Krishna. And that's how you can understand God, actually. In this cloud of unknowing, the author says, God is that person. It's an interesting definition of God. He says, God is that person who cannot be thought, but loved. No? That's God. God cannot be thought. The moment you start to think God, that's not God anymore. That's why we emphasize Gyan Sunya Bhakti. Brain dead Bhakti in the words of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So mystery. If you want to become mystic, to enter a mystical tradition, as the Gaudiya tradition is, you have to embrace mystery. I don't know if you realize that, but both the words mystery and mystical share the same root. So you cannot enter a mystical tradition without learning to coexist with mystery. There's this famous other theologian, Rudolf Otto, which will have this Latin term, mysterium tremendum. Not only mystery. He will say God is mysterium tremendum, which means tremendous. God, the divine, is experienced as mysterious, as awesome, and as urgent. And that's how the gopis experience Krishna. He's mysterious, he's awesome nonetheless, and he's urgent. He's an urgent situation. He needs us. But all of this is tied with the idea of mysterious. Again, the gopis search for Krishna, desperate, in madness, as we know, with this deep spirit, comprehensive spirit, embracing darkness, following his footsteps. Now, then comes the Lila narrative, as we know. The gopis men found the footsteps, then found another pair of footsteps. Sorry if I'm going too quick now. And finally, as we know, the gopis found Radha being left by Krishna, and the gopis joined Sri Radha in Viraha Kirtan, in Kirtan in separation. I've given entire series about this, Gopi Gita and so on, so it's beyond the scope of the present class. So if you want more details about Gopi Gita, the song of the gopis in separation, you can go to that series. So let's conclude Gopi Gita and the reunion between Krishna and the gopis. So there's so much still to distill, to share. Sorry, time is of the essence at this point. So without your permission, I will be quite brief, describing the remaining sections of the RASA-LILA. And maybe we can delve more in detail in another moment. So led by Radha, the gopis are together with her engaging in the famous Gopi Gita. This kirtan in separation, while Tamal Krishna is hiding behind a Tamal tree, witnessing the whole scene and watching the hearts of the gopis blossoming in separation. And eventually Krishna reappears. He cannot resist anymore. So he reappears in their midst, and Krishna explains himself why he disappeared from the gopis, actually making it clear I didn't disappear because I don't care for you, but actually I disappear because I care so much for you, because I love you so much, and I want to increase your love for me. And I realize the only way for you to increase my love is by me disappearing. And so Krishna starts to explain how much he appreciates the love of the gopis. That's why he disappeared. But also, as we know, sorry, while witnessing their kirtan, while Krishna was hiding behind the tamal tree and the gopis were singing, he disappeared with some purposes in mind. But while witnessing the kirtan, he discovered a new purpose why he was watching that, which was to taste Radha Bhava, as we know. He watched Sri Radha reach a new height of love, and he started to wonder, what's the love she's feeling for me? What's the beauty she finds in me? What's the happiness she derives by perceiving my beauty? All these three main desires, which give birth, if you will, to Gaur Lila in some way, in the zenith of the Bhagavatam, in the Rasa-Lila. Again, all of these sections require a separate series. So, interestingly, since we mentioned Mahaprabhu when we were speaking about mystery, there's no higher mystery than Mahaprabhu, than Gaur Lila. If all this Rasa-Lila was so mysterious, and Mahaprabhu is the final result or product, the distilled essence of the Rasa-Lila, I mean, and the whole Rasa-Lila is the greatest mystery, Mahaprabhu has to be the greatest of the greatest mysteries. Indeed, Mahaprabhu is called Channa Avatar, means the hidden avatar, which means the mysterious avatar. He's hidden because he's secretly relishing in the topmost mystery, which is Radha's Mahabhav. So everything is about mystery. So hopefully we are willing to embrace mystery on some degree. So someday we can participate in the ultimate mystery. So in this way, after all these layers of complexity that we have described today have been properly integrated, Krishna coming, going, calling, sending the gopis back, they arguing. No? So after all these layers of integration, of complexity were integrated, now both Krishna and the gopis are led by Radha, are ready to restart the Rasa-Lila. Remember, Rasa-Lila began, was interrupted, and now has been upgraded, revised, re-edited. So now they are able to engage in the revised edition of Rasa-Lila, upgraded, distilled by the fire of separation, if you want, by the fire of integration. As we know, the diamond, before it was diamond, was cold, and for being diamond requires fire, it requires pressure to become a gemstone. So we are all in that process similarly. So finally, after all these layers put in place, we are ready to properly celebrate, commemorate Rasa-Lila as it is, Rasa Mandala. So let me conclude with a few words about Rasa Mandala, which means, mandala means circle. So Rasa Mandala means, refers to the circular dance. Again, remember, life is a circular dance, sacred one, not a survival one. And God himself is a circle, as we will see. So till now, we have been preparing preliminary moments, preparing ourselves for the actual Rasa-Lila, revised edition, the sacred dance in itself. So I hope you understand how important it is to have all the preliminary elements in place. Because as you will see, maybe I will speak about the final Rasa-Lila 5 minutes, while I spoke almost an hour and a half about the preliminary section to the dance, for the actual dance to happen. So that's important. Don't underestimate that. Like Jiva Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he's describing sadhana bhakti, and he says, actually sadhana bhakti is like a preliminary function to bhava bhakti. Bhava bhakti is the real thing where you really have bhava. But that doesn't mean that sadhana bhakti is less important because of that. No, he's saying, like, when you have a yajna, you have to buy in the market, get ghee and wood for the yajna. The going to the market is not part of the yajna. but it's a preliminary act before the actual yajna. So sadhana bhakti is kind of the preliminary thing, putting everything in place so the yajna of love can take place. But again, because it's preliminary, doesn't mean it's less crucial, especially for us as sadhakas. So that's why I prefer to invest more time in this direction. And again, part of those preparations for the yajna, if you will, has been part of that had been to separate between a mere survival dance, where we just move even in the name of faith, even in the name of spirit, even in the name of surrender, just as to secure our comfort zone, our social security, support, peer review, tribal, whatever. So that's one thing, survival dance, but an actual sacred dance is totally something different. Sacred circular dance, which is constantly rotating and self-nourishing in each other. That's mandala. And so let's conclude there with the notion of the circular. Let's mention some brief words before that. With the notion of the circular, and well, let's make full circle to our presentation. So it is said that generally the greatest symbols are the simplest. And for that reason, they are the most difficult also. Like a circle. A circle is very difficult to understand, very simple. We are not so simple. That's why something simple is difficult for us. So the simplest symbols are the greatest and the most difficult. And in this connection, a true circle, what to speak, a sacred circle, is something very cryptic. Because in one sense, it has no purpose outside of itself. It points nowhere but to itself. Again, the circle is rotating and pointing to itself, self-referring, not because of egocentrism, because of, in this case, RASA-LILA. It's a dance of pure pleasure. It's of celebration. It's not that they have separate selfish necessities that they need to fulfill through the other person. No, they are so full in themselves, both Krishna and the gopis, that they overflow in fullness and they need to celebrate. That's RASA-LILA. A dance of pure pleasure, a dance of love, nothing else, quote unquote, nothing else. It's a celebratory movement that is nourishing itself. Circle. Interesting, these days we have been watching some lecture by Richard Rohr, this famous Christian Franciscan monk and author. And he liked to refer, he wrote a whole book about the Trinity in Christianity, and he likes to conceive God as a circle as well. He refers to this Greek term perichoresis. Choresis means like choreography or dance, and peri is quite connected to the Sanskrit pari, like parikram, something that moves circumambulation. So perichoresis will mean basically circular dance. So that's how the Christian mystics conceive the Trinitarian notion of God, in constant flow and movement, not like God is conceived, in other words, as a circle dance. He even will say that this follows even the principles like that, those of quantum physics. God is a flow. God is in constant movement, in constant evolution, in constant community. It's a continuum, if you will, of perpetual reciprocity. So that's RASA-LILA. That's a sacred circle of dance and continued evolution and nourishing and self-actualization. And we as Gaudias could say that. No, indeed, God is a circle. We could even say that God is a circle in the sense of, okay, we may not speak in terms of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, but we can speak in terms of, I don't know, from Mahaprabhu we go to Krishna, from Krishna we go to Sri Radha, from Radha we go back to Gaur, and one Lila is taking us to the other, and the other Lila is nourishing the other, no? Jatayata Gauda Padara Vindam, one Lila is nourishing the other in circular dynamics, instead of speaking in terms of a hierarchical triangle, a hierarchy system, which sometimes is promoted in religious circles or in society or in life, in our own minds, and conceiving things in terms of triangles and hierarchy instead of circle and dance. Now, a circle implies collaboration, co-creation, co-evolution, community. Community is a circular dance, and RASA-LILA is the perfection of communal experience. So that's the way. That's how this Rasa-Lila is creating community, by sharing with us its very essence. And that's the community we want to participate. At least I want to participate in the here and now. That's the notion of community, of dance, that we want to hopefully participate in the here and now. And Sumati will say for the rest of forever. So anyhow, some words I want to share today regarding Sri Rasa-Lila, especially in the context of life as a sacred circular dance and not as mere survival dance. So thank you so much for your time. I've extended myself quite a lot. So I will stop here with your permission. I won't be entertaining questions today, but hopefully soon, I don't know, let's see if there's some other series of lectures come with Q&A, and in which format we will be letting you know about that. So Sri Rasa-Lila ki jai. Gaur Pramanand, Hari Hari Bo. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Ananta koti vaishnava vrinda ki jai. Gaur Hari Bo.